YouTube channel. I just briefly introduce you to our both presenters of this session, Angelo Mario Del Grosso and Federico Boschetti, both from the Instituto, Institute for Computational Linguistics, Zampoli of the Italian National Research Council, CNR, in Pisa. And both are now in one or another way closely connected to our center, to the center, Venice Center for Digital and Public Humanities. Federico is heading the Archipelago DH and has a permanent position shared with Ca' Foscari University and the CNR. And Angelo is visiting scholar 1 week or 2 weeks now until the rest of the year, and will closely work in several projects, scholarly editions and computational linguistic aspects of many other projects. So this is really core members of our team here in Venice. And yeah, welcome, and the floor is yours. You give instructions and tell what is going on now. I put myself on mute.
Okay, so in this first lecture, we will study the principles of textual markup and the basic elements of 3 formalisms that have been created by the Worldwide Web Consortium. These technologies are the hypertext markup language, the HTML, the cascading style sheets, that are CSS, and the extensible markup language, XML. So let us start with HTML. Whenever you navigate in the web, you find pages that are rendered in a graphical way. But if you open the page source, you can see the code that created that pages, okay? So it's enough, for example, to click on the right button of your mouse in order to see the page source of the page that is constituted by these kind of codes that you see on the right side of the page. So, what is the markup? And which is the difference between markup languages and programming languages? The main difference is that markup languages represent, describe data, whereas programming languages process data. Markup languages don't perform arithmetic or logical operations. And typically, a markup language uses tags, for example, the open P and the close P tags that are delimited by meta characters, for example, less than and greater than, to record secondary information, for example, layout specifications about primary information, for example, textual content expressed by character sequences. HTML describes interlinked documents that are exchanged on the web. So, any HTML document has a hierarchical structure that is represented by a tree of nodes rooted in the HTML element. The code that you see on the left can be represented as a tree, and you see on the right this tree representation, okay? So any time that an element contains child elements, it can be represented as a node that has dependencies, okay, in a hierarchical structure in which overlappings are forbidden. It is very slow to go from one page to the other page. Let me see. Okay. So elements may have attributes. No, but first of all, we must see the elements and attributes. So elements are data containers. If they have textual or mixed content, they are delimited by a starting tag and an end tag. Like in this example, no? P is the open tag, and then we have an M that is another open tag, and then we close the M element with the ending tag, okay? And then we have an empty tag, and at the end we close the P element by the ending tag. As you can see, if they are empty, they are constituted just by an empty tag without textual content or without other elements inside. Elements may have attributes. Attributes are constituted by two parts, an attribute name and attribute value. And also the empty elements may have attributes, as you can see in this example. The HTML tags are just a little more than 100 elements, okay, 100 tags, okay, and they are listed in this big table, okay. And now we will see the most interesting categories of them. First of all, the head of an HTML document. Why? Because a document has always a root that is the HTML root element, okay? And then it is divided in a head in which you can find metadata, and a body in which you find all the content of the document. So the head contains the title of the document, for example, a list of meta elements with character encoding, for example, and other information, and a link with style sheet reference. And it may contains also scripts that provide the document with commands to process the contents, like in this example. Okay, the character coding of the entire document is declared in the head. You see that we have a meta element, okay, it is an empty element with an attribute character set, okay, char set. In this case, we say that it must be UTF-8. UTF-8 is one of the most efficient serializations for the Unicode. What is Unicode? Unicode is the universal character encoding that is maintained by the Unicode Consortium. This encoding standard provides the basis for processing, storage, and interchange of text data in any language. Unicode covers all the characters for all the writing systems of the world, modern and ancient. It also includes technical symbols, punctuations, and many other characters used in writing text. But in HTML, it is possible also to encode special characters by entities. An entity starts by an ampersand character and ends by a semicolon. Like in this case, the LT or the GT characters can be rendered by these entities. Inside the body, it's possible to define a header, a menu by nav, a division in articles or sections, and a footer. You see in this case how the textual content is articulated in the page and how it is rendered by browser. The inner document structure is articulated in text blocks or divisions by divs, which usually are constituted by paragraphs that are indicated by P. Okay, so for example, we have a first division, okay, and the H2 is a header, okay. There are H1, H2, H3, and so on that indicates the headers of nested subdivisions, okay. Then you can create lists, ordered lists by OL and unordered lists by UL. And the ordered lists and unordered lists contain list items that are indicated by LI. That means list item, okay? So for example, an ordered list as the code that you see on the left is represented by one order list with 3 items and an unordered list with other 3 items. Typographic bold and italic are marked as strong and M. For example, this is regular, okay, the first line. The second line is strong, so it is represented in bold. And the third line is in italic. And they can be also combined. So you can have an M inside the strong or a strong inside an M, but they cannot overlap, okay? An HTML document can also embeds multimedia content such as images, audio, video, and so on. Naturally, the most frequent multimedia content is the image, okay? So an image is an empty tag, okay? Is represented by an empty tag, so it is an empty element. With a source that indicate the link to the actual image and an alternative information, okay, in case it isn't visualized or in case you want to use a device for accessibility, for example, that read this information instead of showing it. Tables are constituted by rows, so table row, okay, which contain table headers or table data, as in this case. So you have a table with 2 columns and 4 cells, okay? So 2 columns and an header and 2 rows for a total of 4 cells, okay? And very interesting is the possibility to have an interaction with other with web services or with other applications. Okay, so forms provide documents with the interaction between the user and the front end, that is the client side on the browser, or the backend, that is on the contrary server side. So in this example, for example, okay, you see that the information that you put inside these text boxes are sent to a page that will process it. Okay, proc JSP is an active page, okay, that will process the information and will send back you the results. Okay, it is indicated by the attribute action. Okay, you have the label and then the input control. Okay, in this case, as you can see, you have an input of type text, okay, with an ID author. The ID is extremely important because it is used to catch the values, to identify the values that have been transferred from the client to the server, okay, or that are processed client side by, for example, JavaScript, okay. And at the end, as you can see, there's a button, okay, of type submit, okay. So when you press submit, the two values of the first input elements are sent to the proc.jsp page. How many widgets can we use in a page? A lot. So we here see some of them. Okay. For example, you can use a text box. By text box, by text box you can insert a short text, or you can send a password. In this case, which is the difference? That it isn't visualized. Okay. In a text area, you can put a long text, not formatted. Otherwise, you need to use more complex text editors that we don't see in these examples. And then you have checkboxes, radio boxes. The difference is that the checkboxes are independent one to the other, so you can check all of them or no one of them independently. On the contrary, the radio buttons, okay, the radio buttons are conditioned one to the other. So if you select one, the other ones are unselected, and vice versa. Okay. So if I check radio 1, the other ones are not checked, and if I check radio 2, 1 and 3 are not checked, and if I check radio 3, 1 and 2 are not checked. Okay, so they must have the same name, okay, and a different ID. So if they have the same name, they are grouped together, and the system knows that it must consider them as a set. Okay, and then there's the select also. Okay, that allows you to select a value from a menu. Okay, So from the menu, you select the value, and then you can send it the to the server, or you can process it client side. Okay. Now we will see another very useful technology that is CSS, and it is connected, that is complementary to HTML and also XML. Why? Because it separates the part related to rendering, to the visualization, to the presentation of data. Okay. So cascading style sheets describe how HTML elements must be rendered. It means how they must be graphically represented by browsers on different media devices. For example, desktops, laptops, tablets, smartphones, and different operating systems, Linux, Mac, Windows, Androids, in similar ways, but with the necessary adaptation due to screen size, screen ratio, and so on. A CSS is constituted by a list of rules, and here you can see two rules, for example. Okay, so we have a rule that is applied to the class abstract, to all the elements of class abstract. Okay, and the other one to all the elements with class intro. In the first case, we declare, okay, that the color must be blue, and in the second case that the color must be red. So we choose the syntax of the rules. Any rule is constituted by a selector and a list of declarations. Each declaration is formed by an attribute name and an attribute value. Okay, now we see more details. So selectors are necessary to identify an element or a set of elements. The most frequent selectors are selectors for elements. So for example, you say just P, okay? All the paragraphs must be, for example, in blue, or in black, or in italics, or in bold, or with a specific margin, and so on. Okay, then we have the identifiers of specific elements. So the identifier is a specific attribute of the element, the attribute ID equals something that must be unique inside the HTML page. Okay, so for example, first paragraphs could have ID P1, second paragraph P2, and so on. Okay, and then the class. Class is another attribute of an element. Okay, that is class equals something. Okay, so for example, a class of a div could be row, for example. Okay, the class of another div could be col, in order to indicate a column. Okay, the list of selectors and their combinations can be visualized at this link. Okay, declarations concern any aspect of the graphical representation of an element. For example, how to render paragraph of class quote in italic, gray, justified, and smaller than the other paragraphs in the same div is represented by this rule, in which I am saying that the paragraph of class abstract must be colored in gray. Okay, every time that you see this RGB representation with 3 values that are the same, it means that you have a different degree of gray. Okay, why? Because R red and green G and blue B, okay, are set with the same value. Okay, so it is a shadow of gray. Okay, and then I say that the text must be justified. Okay, and the font size must be 90% of its parent. Okay, the cascade is a very important concepts because CSS are a cascade of style sheets because the properties are combined, calculated, inherited, overwritten in a cascade. It is according to the hierarchy and the priority of the declarations. Okay, like in this example. So the div that contain the P is 16 points. So the P will be 50% of of its parent. So it will be 8 points. The element box. Each element content is located in a box that is surrounded by settable padding, border, and margin. Padding is a space between content and the border can be invisible or rendered by several types of lines. Margin is a space beyond the border. Okay? Complex layouts can be rendered by the flex properties, but I don't enter in details, okay? Because it's better that we start discussing a little bit XML, okay? So the third technology that we will discuss today. HTML is a markup language oriented to the presentation and interlinking of documents on the web. Its expressivity is limited but optimized for the visualization of textual and graphic content on the web. And the evolution of the web requires more expressivity. So XML, that is the extensible markup language, was created as a meta language oriented to data representation instead of just data presentation. The common ancestor is SGML, but we don't treat it just to know, okay, that HTML can be represented in 2 different serializations. Okay, on the contrary, XML it must be serialized only and all with one kind of serialization in which you open the tags, you close the tags, even if they are empty, you must have a specific syntax for the empty tag, okay? The XML elements, so naturally they are very similar to the elements that we saw previously, but they are as we said, extensible. Okay, so XML is used to create markup languages. Okay, so tag sets, vocabularies, and XML applications. XML is extensible because it doesn't provide any default element, but rules to build XML documents. At the beginning, we saw a list of more or less 100 HTML tags. Okay, so a limited, a closed set of tags. Okay, on the contrary, XML defines the rule to create your own language, so your own vocabulary and your own syntax and your own grammar, okay, your own grammar to define which are the relations among the elements. For example, if an element can be empty or not, if an element can be contained or not inside another element, if it is mandatory, if you can have more than one instance of the element inside the other elements, and so on. Yeah, here you see the syntax of the XML elements. Okay, that is very, very similar to the HTML that we saw before. Okay. In this case, you see that we have a parent element that is product, okay, and a child element that is product name, okay, child elements, product name, manufacturer, description, and these two ones, price and price, are sibling elements because are at the same hierarchical level, okay? The attributes, also in this case, the elements may have one or more attributes. An attribute describe a property of the element. An attribute has two components, name and value, okay? And the value is a string and must be always surrounded by quotation marks. The schema. So, as we said, XML is a meta language. Any specific XML language is described by the schema, which defines the vocabulary of the language and the syntactic structure of the language. The schema may be created a priori to validate all the documents defined by the schema, or a posteriori from non-validated but well-formed documents. And some applications, for example, Oxygen, can be used to extract the schema from well-formed documents. Okay, so for example, you create well-formed documents without a schema. It isn't a valid document, but it is a well-formed document, and then you create the schema from the document or documents that you created. Okay, so well-formed and valid documents. Well-formed documents, general XML syntactic rules are respected. The rules to open and close tags, for example, and any XML document must be well-formed. No syntactic errors are allowed. Valid documents is a further constraint. The constraints of the XML schema are respected. Any valid document must be also well-formed. Okay? And so you can associate a document, an XML document, to a specific schema that validates that document. There are some very popular XML schemas. So, for example, SVG, MathML, or DocBook. Okay, and each XML schema is devoted to a specific domain. So, for example, SVG to represent graphics, okay, MathML to represent mathematical formulae, and DocBook to publish scientific documents, for example, and so on. And there are many of them, and one of these very popular schemas are the schemas of the text encoding initiative that you will study in the next days. Minimalist HTML Doc versus Minimalist TI XML is here represented. So here you see in a HTML document, you have HTML that is the root, okay, and then you have a head that contains metadata, and the body that contains what is rendered on the screen. Okay, and here you have a minimalist TI document. Okay, inside of the file descriptions you have some mandatory data that we will see in the next slide. Okay, and also in this case it is very important to distinguish between a header in which you have metadata and text with its body that contains the textual content of the document. So here you see the header in detail. Okay, for example, here in the head, and in this HTML document, we have more or less the same information that you have in the TI document, okay, but represented in a different way. Okay, so in this case we have meta elements that contain the meta information, and on the contrary, in the TI document, they are structured in a different way. In conclusion, we can say that HTML, CSS, and XML are technologies in evolution, and the general trend is the maximal separation of concern between data structure, semantics, representation, and presentation. New versions of HTML are more and more open to semantics. I mean, to data representation versus data presentation. And they are more and more open to customization. I mean, component embedding and tag set extension. So the next HTML specification tags like app my project, for example, can be embedded in a HTML document in order to provide the language with custom expressivity that, as we saw, for example, in HTML5 is not allowed. Okay, so we have finished.